Today's guest is one of the most reliable, I think is a good word, architects of modern thriller fiction, a writer who lives right at the intersection of espionage, special operations, and real world geopolitics. Mark Greaney is the #1 New York Times bestselling author of the Gray Man series and co author of multiple Tom Clancy novels. You wrote some of them actually yourself. I want to talk about that with you a little bit. His new novel, The Hardline, dives straight into a pressure zone where state power, covert action, and personal loyalty collide, and where the difference between right and wrong is rarely clean or comfortable. All the trappings of a fantastic read. Mark Greaney, thanks so much for being here on the State Secrets podcast. It's great to have you back.
Thank you so much for having me. I love your introduction. I'm always trying to explain my book in a couple of sentences. That was the best one I've heard so far. Wish I was
There you
writing
go.
it down, but that's
Well, it's a great book. The Hardline is in bookstores February 17th. And I want to tell you why I really like sort of how you set this one up and the plot line and all of it. It takes place court gentry, of course. Your returning main character here is running an operation out of an office park, really. That's kind of what it is in Norfolk, Virginia. And this is sort of like an off the books kind of operation that they're running. They come in and they do a lot of the work that's really difficult for the CIA to do as openly. So it's just got all the intrigue. You've placed it right in Norfolk, Virginia, which is a fantastic place for folks who are already special operations nerds, of course. And the intelligence community and special operations, the way they come together to sort of tackle some of these missions throughout your series is fantastic. So I'm a big fan of how you came up with this idea. I'm sure you can explain it even better than I did, but give us a little bit of background on why you came up with this one. Now your 15th novel in this series, right?
That's right. It's book 15. And, I'm always trying to do something different than I've done before. But at the end of the last book, the hero and his cohorts had basically made a deal with the deputy director of the CIA to help them with it in a jam in Russia and Ukraine. And to pay back that deal, they said they would basically do whatever they were told. And so the deputy director of the CIA has started this little sub rosa group called Ghost Town. And as you said, they're basically based out of a former podiatry office in Norfolk. And they're a very small team, sort of three hard end of the stick assets, and then a little bit of support. And at the very beginning of this book, they are, spun up to kind of combat an insider threat in the U.S. government. So there's been an infiltration and a breach that no one can quite get their hands on. And at the same time, 5 assassins come into America and begin eliminating kind of high-level intelligence professionals. So Ghost Town is kind of the one group that they think has not been compromised because they're actually not with the agency or with the U.S. intelligence community. So they have to go and try and slow down this attack of assassins and get to the bottom of what's going on.
I always feel like when I'm reading your novels, they are kind of ripped from the headlines, and the world is getting way more complicated, not less complicated.
Yeah.
And I wonder, like when you're plotting these things out, how do you pull all these pieces together? Where do you find this creative well you keep going to come up with these rather complicated plot lines that, I mean, you tell like they're easy, like it's no big deal, like it's something you just thought of over coffee in the morning.
Yeah, I didn't. I wish I thought of them over coffee in the morning. You get little bitty bits and pieces that start you off, and I always think, each of these books I sort of start at the beginning of the year, and then in the spring I'm just pulling my hair out, and then in the summer it starts to come together, and then later in the summer as deadline looms, I'm pulling my hair out again, trying to make it work and trying to make it smart. These are 150,000 word books, and I always feel like that's more than 150,000 decisions I have to make because you also have to figure out what not to write. So they are complicated. I try and put them on the page as uncomplicated as possible. But I initially had an idea years ago that I talked to my editor about, and I said it would be cool if one day, because you never see this in these types of books, something that the Gray Man does in a previous book, some henchman that he knocks off a cliff or something on his way to his main mission, comes back to bite him. And in this book, it goes back to a previous mission where he killed a young man who was protecting a criminal, and that young man's father is a notorious Northern Irish assassin, and that guy is brought in to America to eliminate intelligence professionals, but he has a very personal reason for going after the Gray Man. So that was my initial idea, and then everything else built from that. I knew that I wanted this Northern Irishman to come in to the country to be part of this conspiracy. And the way our country is so divided right now, it made me think of 1970s era conspiracy movies like The Parallax View or The Conversation or 3 Days of the Condor or something like that. And I thought I could play off of that a little bit and kind of have a domestic threat with some international attachments to it. And no one knows sort of who to trust, and just turn it into this big sweeping espionage novel, which is what eventually happened after, 9 months of writing or so.
Yeah, which I think is why your fans love this so much. You also have this great way of like traveling the world and making your readers feel like they're traveling the world with you. And in this particular book, you go to Tunis, you go to Nicaragua. Do you actually go to all these places?
I don't go to all these places. For this novel, I went to Northern Ireland. That was sort of my foreign location research I did,
Yeah.
because a character is Northern Irish, and the book almost opens in Northern Ireland and it almost closes in Northern Ireland. So it was a setting in the novel, and I really kind of wanted to understand the Troubles and see what it was like now, the situation up in the north. And so I did location research there. For the 16th Gray Man book, which I'm working on now, I just got back from the Tyrolean Alps in Austria. I went there in January and did research, and I'm going to the Cayman Islands in a couple months. And so as often as I can, I do research. It's usually limited by the political situation in the country I'm writing about, obviously the time that I have to do it, and those sorts of things. But it helps me greatly to actually get on the ground there.
So this is a really nerdy technical question, but when you're traveling to these amazing places, are you actually like writing down the street names and the descriptions of the buildings to think about for like later when you're sitting down in write mode, or do you actually like sit down and write something in the moment? Like how do you pull it all together, Mark?
Let's say 90% of it is getting ideas for later, and 10%, like I will love working in coffee shops and hotel lobbies and in my room while I'm traveling. Sometimes I go with my wife, and they look pretty much like regular vacations, even though I tell her when we're in Zurich, I've got to go find a mailbox that's in this area and see if there's a public phone somewhere. Or I was in Austria a couple weeks ago, and I was probably the only person in the Alps taking a picture of a public bathroom and a payphone, just on a street corner. So a lot of it is logging things for later, but a lot of it is just trying to, get ideas, and then I do some of the writing. Sometimes literally light bulbs go off, and other times I'll do the whole trip and then not really sure how to work it in. So it's a combination. I've never gone on a research trip where I didn't come back thinking like, wow, that really is going to help the book.
Yeah, very inspiring. You've written, I think, more than 20 novels now total, right? Outside the series.
27, yeah.
Yeah, you worked with Tom Clancy. I mean, you've really had kind of a legendary career that got started a little bit later in
Yeah.
life for a lot of folks. Can you talk a little bit about that? I think you were like 40, 41 when
Yeah, I
you
was
first.
42 when my first book
Yeah.
came out. I spent 20 years trying to get published, and that's not to scare people away, because when I look back on it, I'm like, if I'd been if I'd been more diligent and less procrastinating, that I could have cut that down to 5 probably. But I had an idea for a book when I was in college, in like 20, early 20s, and I started in 1990, and I finished it in 2005, and immediately shelved it, wrote something else. I finished my second book in about 7 months. And The Gray Man was my fourth book. So my first published novel was my fourth book. And since then, yeah, this is my 27th published novel. And I kind of look at it, for the first at least decade of my career, I don't think I said no to any thing that anyone ever asked me to write. as busy as I was, I guess it was sort of making up for lost time. And I wrote 2 books a year for the longest time, and one of those would be a Clancy novel, which were up to upwards of 200,000 words. And now I think it probably averages like 1.4 books a year. This year I'm writing one book, and then I'm starting the next one, which I'll finish next year, and then write another book next year. So it's still a heavy pace. I kind of don't know how I did it when I was doing a Clancy book and a Gray Man book every year. I look back on that like that was another person.
I don't know how you did
I
it.
don't either.
I wonder now, like with all this success, sort of like, under your belt, do you get recognized when you're flying on these planes to wonderful places, or are you just this anonymous guy in the corner of the coffee shop? Do fans recognize you?
I am almost always anonymous. I mean, I get recognized. I think it's kind of the perfect level, because if I'm at a writers conference or whatever, people know who I am, and that's great to come up. And then just randomly, I was at Gatwick Airport, and a guy came up and asked me if I was Mark Greaney. Um, Usually, it's my name that's recognized. So if I'm ever anywhere wearing a name tag, I was at a firearms trade event in Las Vegas last week, and as you know, I'm just not noticed in normal life, and I'm in hotels and airports or whatever, and I put the badge on and I walk in there, and immediately people are coming up and grabbing me from behind to say hi. And I'm like, oh yeah, you got to turn on that mode because it's very disconcerting when you remember you have your name on your chest, and it's like, okay, people are going to know who you are now.
Different environment. I think that
Yeah.
Las Vegas was that for SHOT Show this year.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, big gathering. I was out there as well. Brad, my husband, former Green Beret, was moderating for one of the charities out there. Some really
Cool.
cool sessions that we should have
Yeah.
invited you to. And now that I know that you go there,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. I've gone in the last 3 or 4 years with Aimpoint, and I signed books at the Aimpoint booth. Yeah.
okay, gotcha. You bring a lot of special operations, of course, like into the whole series throughout, and this is something that you've actually gone and trained on, right? I mean, you've invested the time to learn weapon systems, tactics, procedures. Like, talk a little bit about the evolution of that, because things are constantly changing, especially now with technology. And if you started writing these books, when you did, the world has changed so much since then. How are you kind of keeping up with all of it?
Yeah, I did a novel that involved the weaponization of AI about 3 books ago, and I did research all year on that. And I'm not researching it now, but I guarantee it's a very dated novel from 3 years ago, just because of that particular type of technology. And I guess you just can't let yourself worry about your books becoming dated to people a couple years down the road. You're writing contemporary stories for what's going on right now, and all you can do is try and get as close to the cutting edge as possible. But I started training with firearms before I was published, but as I was trying to write these types of books. I'm not a former military, law enforcement, as intelligence or whatever. I was just a massive fan of these types of books. So I knew it would behoove me to really educate myself as much as possible. And I started taking simple, handgun classes, and then carbine classes, and then, more sophisticated classes, and tactical medicine stuff. And really, more than the guns and the tactics, it's the people that you meet in the team houses and the cadres at the training places, and you learn so much and you make so many great contacts that has served me as well as anything that I've ever done in my career. So I'm really glad to do that. My garage right now looks like I'm about to start a revolution, because I'm about to go do some I'm going to load up my Tahoe and go out to a range as soon as we're done, because I've got some training to do. And yeah, it's a fun part of the job.
So you could hold your own in Court Gentry's world, I think.
Absolutely not. I would be, as I said at the beginning of this, as the henchman that gets pushed off the cliff as the hero runs by. I would be that guy, but at least I would know how to dress, I guess.
Well, you have something in common with Tom Clancy, which is you were a great fan of the genre
Yeah.
before you became a great author in the genre. And I'm wondering what it was like. You worked with him on, you worked with him, I think, on one novel, right? Before
Three,
he
three,
passed
yeah, three before he passed away.
three
Yeah.
before he passed away. Okay. What was that experience like for you? It must have been surreal.
Yeah, I mean, surreal is a word that doesn't capture anything. It's what you say when you don't know what to say, and so I do say that a lot. But I will say when my agent first called me and said, "Would you be interested in co-authoring with Tom Clancy?" I'd only had two paperback novels out at that time. I wasn't, a big deal. I think we had the same editor, and I think I was really good at returning my editor's phone calls and turning my books in on time, which I've gotten less good at as time's gone as time has gone by. But I remember just being terrified by the whole prospect of it, but knowing that it was the opportunity of a lifetime. And I got to meet with Tom, and we wrote a book in 2011, and I wasn't allowed to tell anybody that I was co-authoring with Tom Clancy the whole time I was writing the book, which was just terrible because I was going to the Pentagon trying to get doors open for me to get information, non-classified information. And I remember that whole year going like, if I could just say I'm writing a Jack Ryan book with Tom Clancy right now, every one of these people would pay attention to me in a different way. Um, and then so yeah, after that first book came out, it was a whole different ball game. And then he passed away right after we finished the third novel, and then his family asked me if I wanted to continue the Jack Ryan novels, which of course I did, and I did 7 and 6 years, and only stepped away because I felt like I didn't have a fresh idea for the next year, and I was just going to write something different that was not in that milieu, and it was the right decision at the time. Yeah.
Do you still find that that experience changed you as a writer? I mean, when you're sitting down and you're writing the Court Gentry series, are there words that Tom Clancy said to you that run through your head now and then when you're trying to sort through a scene or work on a character?
Yeah, if I said that it didn't influence me, there's proof that it did, because if you look at my first three Gray Man's novels, I'm very proud of them, but they're very the hyper action, super kinetic, and not geopolitical, and not maybe don't have the nuance that books four and beyond have. And that was the Tom Clancy effect. The fourth book, the fourth Gray Man book, was the first book that I wrote while I was writing Clancy, and it just looks like a different animal. And part of it is what I've sort of learned, and part of it was having the opportunity to write these type of books as a Clancy, in the Jack Ryan world. And then I thought, well, hey, I could probably get away in the Gray Man novel by going a little bit longer and a little bit wider and a little bit deeper with the story. So it was almost like the Clancy calling card allowed me to kind of flex those muscles and to write those books that I'd always, really enjoyed. So yeah, it was a huge impact on my career.
Yeah. Do you with this latest book, The Hardline, coming out, being on bookshelves February 17th, I'm wondering, do you have like favorites? I mean, do you really sometimes just get more carried away with one story and more into it, and it's like, I don't know, has certain touch points of like, oh, this is more exciting than maybe my last book was, or is it not really like that?
It's like portions of each book. Like I can look at every one of my books and remember what it was that really fired me up and what I really enjoy about it. And then there's parts in each book where, honestly, you go, my imagination before I wrote that scene might have been, might have hit the mark better than it ended up on the page. I don't know it. So they're kind of all your children in some ways, and there's aspects in each one, and there's books that didn't sell as well as other books, and I go like, I don't really get it because I really like that. I have noticed doing this long enough that the very personal stories kind of hit home with readers more than the big geopolitical ones, which I guess would make sense, but I don't know that I knew that as I started off. It's less about, are they going to stop the nuclear bomb in time, and more about, is he going to get these kids out of danger, or, is his relationship with his father, within the confines of a big action novel, how is that going to change? So I lean towards the personal stuff, and I think that impacts me as a reader more too. I like the geopolitical stuff, and I like, the technology and all those things. But if you can make that story really, really, high personal stakes to the characters that people care about, that really resonates with them.
Yeah. Why the hardline as a title? Do you pick that or does your editor pick it? Like, where does that come from?
That is a more complicated question than you could imagine. I pick a title and they thumbs up or thumbs down, and then I pick, a dozen more titles, just trying to get them to like one that I like. They'll come at me with titles. The Hardline was my title, but it was probably the 35th title or something that I have written. There have been titles I've been trying to sneak past them for a decade that nobody seems to like at my publisher, but I'm just going to keep throwing it out there every year. The Hardline sort of relates to so there. Court's father is in this, and his nemesis Whetstone, who's this Northern Irish assassin. His father is in, the history of this guy is involved. His son is involved. His grandson is not a character in the book, but is referenced in the story. And there's sort of a point between the two characters, Court and Whetstone, who are antagonist and protagonist, but actually have a lot in common, where they sort of muse about whether or not their ends of their part of their own family tree has destined them to live this life of sort of peril and moral uh, questionable morality and all these things. And Whetstone says something like, we're the hard line of the the bloodline. And he says something like, I have a brother who's a florist. It's like, we don't all do this, but some of us are kind of destined to follow in our father's footsteps. And Whetstone's father was an IRA assassin. Court's father was a Marine and a firearms trainer. And so they're kind of the harder edge characters in their families.
Yeah. What did you do before you started doing this full time?
I worked a number of jobs, but mostly in international sales and marketing. So I worked with a medical device company where I was an associate that dealt with our subsidiaries in Latin America mostly. And before that, I worked in gifts and home decor, but also international. So I've always kind of, enjoyed travel, enjoyed working with other countries, studying foreign languages, meeting people from other places. And in college, I studied international relations and political science. So that was my only connection, other than the fact that all I really did in my free time was read spy novels and and read everything. I mean, I don't think there's an espionage type novel between the late 60s and the 2000s that I didn't pick up and read. And I think that had more to do with anything. I never really took classes in writing or anything like that. I just became a massive fan of this sort of thing.
I love that. And of course, Tom Clancy, I think, sold insurance. And,
Yeah.
so that kind of brings me to my next question, which is, we meet a ton of people at the site for Brief who are so interested in writing books based on their careers in this profession. I don't know that all of them could do it as well as you do, but I think those with that sort of fascination for writing and that I don't know what the word is, but that urge to write, it's definitely something people either have or don't have. But what advice do you give to people? I'm sure you get asked that question all the time.
Sure, and you actually sort of said it. You said there's an urge to do it, and I, to so many people go like, "Never quit, just don't give up," and whatever. And I'm like, well, there's things I wish I was really good at that I wasn't really adept at. So it's probably a good thing that I gave up on my desire to be a soccer player or an F1 driver or anything like that. It's so. I just felt compelled to write. And, it took me 20 years to get published. And everybody's like, it's amazing you didn't give up. And it wasn't really a question of giving up. It was just something I love to do. And, yeah, you hit those hurdles. And really my advice would be, if you really like to write and you keep writing and you get to these speed bumps that you seem like you can't get over, just think about, well, what if you did? If you got over that speed bump, you would leave 100,000 people that say they want to be writers behind, and then you would be like not one in a million. You'd be one in 10,000, and then you get to the other big hurdle, and so that this career is all about just executing everything and not just writing the cool parts of the book, not just having an idea for a story. Every single day I get emails from people. It's like, hey, I've got an amazing idea for a story. Call me up. Here's my number and let's write it together. And I'm like, I come up with ideas for stories that I'm passionate about too. And the idea for the story is necessary but not sufficient to being an author. And really, your career is not going to happen from you coming up with this cool thing about, the president's kid being kidnapped. It's like people can come up with that. It's the 150,000 words in the middle of the book that they have to do. So, if it's something you love to do, just do it for the love of it, and, take it seriously, and good things will happen. And that doesn't mean you're going to be number one on the bestseller list, but that means you'll be doing something you enjoy, and you'll definitely be a better writer. If you wrote the next 5 days in a row, you'll be a better writer than if you didn't. So it's as simple
Yeah.
as that.
Yeah, if you write 5 days in a row, if you work with Tom Clancy, whatever.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Read every book written since the '60s in this genre. I
yeah.
think you put a lot into this, Mark, and it really shows, I think, in your passion for the characters and your creativity in coming up with these plots year after year. Definitely shows.
Thank
So,
you.
what is the next big challenge for you? I mean, you're on the book train, so clearly you've said you're already working on your next one. Is there something that you haven't done yet with your career that you really want to do?
Yeah, all my ambition involves doing something different and doing something that I'm like more proud of. I'm writing the 16th Gray Man book, and then I'm going to write something out of this genre. It'll still be a thriller, but not an espionage thriller, and it won't be a Gray Man book. I've written other non-Gray Man books before, but they've all been, involved civilian military contractors, or conventional military, or that sort of thing. This is going to be more of a suspense type thriller. So I'm excited to do that. I'll start that later this year, and go into next year with that. And then, hopefully keep writing these Gray Man books as well as other things. So, I just always want to do something different, and, be proud of it at the end. And that's really the heights of my ambition at this point in my career.
Do your editors get nervous when you talk about that? Because they're like, oh, you have such a great audience.
It's funny. It was just the opposite. They came to me and they were like, "What ideas do you have that aren't this?" Because my sales have gone up every year, but they go up at a slower rate as you kind of max out. I'm at this level where, I'm not going to double my readership, because the people that know about these books and read these books are reading me, or aware of me, or maybe they don't like me, but they know about me.
Yeah.
So, they were like, "What ideas do you have that are outside the specific genre that would bring in a whole different group of readers who may then go back and read Gray Man books?" And I have a number of ideas. So I started kind of like pitching things, and they're like, "Well, that's a little close to this," or "That's way far away," and maybe maybe too branched out. But yeah, I think I have the right story
It
to write
sounds like a
next year.
whole new adventure for you.
Yeah, I'm excited to do it.
It sounds exciting. It's so nice to have you here, Mark. I really want to thank you for taking the time. We love talking to you every time you have a new book come out. And I didn't know you had the background in home goods, so I learned. I learned something from you every time. But I have to admit, I love interviewing you on video because I can see the gorgeous backgrounds that you always
Oh,
come up
thank
with, and
you.
they're always different.
Thank you. The one tough thing about doing podcasts is the only place I can set my podcast up, it sort of reveals my entire office behind me. So I'm
It's
always
gorgeous.
looking over my shoulder and going like, is there a LaCroix bottle back there? Or I just came back from out of town the other day, and I've got backpacks and stuff all over the place. And yeah, it's the danger. I'd rather have a little studio where nothing ever changed, but it's usually a disaster right behind me. So
Oh, that wouldn't be real. I think that's the
yeah,
thing about you that so many of your fans like too, is just the real you. Your books are so good. Some of them are so gritty. I mean, it's
thank you.
just the reality. So keep the LaCroix bottle there. No
All
problem.
right. Thank you. Thank you.
Mark, thank you so much. Your new book, The Hardline, another court gentry adventure, is in bookstores in February. Thanks for being here on the State Secrets podcast. It's always great to talk to you.
Always great. Thank you so much.